Hello, welcome to Post-Colonial Space. I'm Masood Raja, and today I'll briefly talk about one of my favorite Urdu epics, Tilism Hoshruba. Now, Tilism Hoshruba is probably the longest and the most ambitious 19th century magical fantasy. It was published between 1883 to 1893 and was commissioned by the Novel Kishore publishers, the first ever printing press established in Lucknow, India by Munshi Novel Kishore, which specialized in publishing Urdu, Persian, Punjabi, and other such local or native languages. Now, Novel Kishore Press had commissioned Muhammad Hussain, a leading writer and storyteller of Lucknow, to write the epic Hoshruba. And he wrote the first 4 volumes. But after the first 4 volumes, they then recommissioned another writer to finish the epic. Now, Musharraf Ali Farooqi has started translating the epic, and I highly recommend his first volume, which is called Hoshruba, The Land and the Tilism. And Farooqi specializes in these kind of translations because he had also previously translated the Dastaan of Amir Hamza, which is intimately connected to Tilism Hoshruba. So my purpose here is to briefly situate Tilism Hoshruba within the Muslim Urdu storytelling tradition of India, and then give a brief account of its narrative structure, what stands out, introduce some main characters, and maybe generally give an overview of the plot and some other peculiarities. Now, if you're interested, this lecture is also available in the audio form on our podcast, which is Post-Colonial Space. You can find it on Apple, you can find it on Spotify. A slightly different version of this lecture is available on all those media that enable you to listen to the lectures. So let's go into first placing the epic within its immediate and historical context. So as I said earlier, the epic was written by Muhammad Hussain, the first 4 volumes, and then the last 4 volumes were finished by Ahmad Hussain Qamar, who was also a prominent writer of Lucknow. The smartest thing that Muhammad Hussain did was he placed the Hoshruba, he gathered the stories which already existed in oral form within the larger domain of Hamza Nama, or Dastaan Amir Hamza. Now, Tilism Hoshruba by itself has 8 volumes. You can see them in the back. Those brown volumes that you always see in the background are the 8 volumes of Tilism Hoshruba. And it's more than 8,000 pages, written in deeply Persianized Urdu, kind of almost inaccessible to people in contemporary times unless they happen to be scholars. So the smartest thing that he did, Muhammad Hussain, was that he connected it to Dastaan of Amir Hamza. So if you look at the opening scene of Tilism Hoshruba, Hamza, who is the hero of Dastaan of Amir Hamza, is following the false god Laqa, who is a giant, to this territory where Laqa has sought refuge, and Hamza camps there with his army. And that's where they encounter the Tilism of Hoshruba, and this new fantastical story emerges, which takes 8 volumes to finish. Now, it is a very ambitious project, of course, but I think translating is almost impossible because, you can translate the story, but you can't really translate the nuances of language itself. So for that, if you're lucky enough to know Urdu, I highly recommend that you should read it. So that is the general narrative context of the story placed within the story of Dastaan of Amir Hamza. Now, if you have not read Dastaan of Amir Hamza, Dastaan of Amir Hamza is story of Hamza, right, who is a hero, based in the real-life historical figure of Hamza, who uncle of Prophet Muhammad, but that's where the resemblance ends. The story is set in Arabia, but most of the action takes place in Persia and elsewhere. Hamza, his friend Amr Ayar, and Muqbil Wafadar are the three chosen ones, right? All three of them are given divine gifts. Hamza is given the impossible strength. He's brave, he's strong. Amr Ayar, on the other hand, is almost a complete opposite of Hamza. He is vicious, he is greedy, he is petty, but he has been given the gift to outrun anything, any living being in the world. He can take any shape that he wants. He can change his appearances. And he has a bag which is called a zambil, in which he can put anything that he desires. It will never get filled and it never gets heavy. And when he wants something from it, all he has to do is touch it and the things appear. Muqbil Wafadar, on the other hand, doesn't play a vital role in the story of Hamza, but he is a master archer and is given a bow which never misses its mark. So these are the three friends from Hamza Nama. The story of Hoshruba, however, is focused on Amr Ayar, the trickster, and one of the princes, Asad. And they're the one who kind of sort of break away from Hamza's main army and form their own adventure. And that's where Hoshruba comes in. So let's try to understand what Hoshruba is. What is a Tilism, right? And how do the authors describe it and create this magical world? So Hoshruba is a self-contained, self-regulating magical world. And it has a terminal point. That means that when it was created, it was inscribed within the system that at a certain point, the magical world will unravel and become no more. But in order to do that, it requires the entry of the conqueror of the Tilism, conqueror of the magical world into the Tilism. And so when we encounter Hoshruba, Hoshruba has already entered its final phase. It's awaiting the arrival of its conqueror. It has three dimensions or three levels, right? The Hazir, the Batin, and the Zulmat. The Hazir is the manifest part of the Tilism, where when you enter it, you see it. The Batin is the hidden part of the Tilism, where the more important sorcerers and sorceresses live, including the emperor. And then the Zulmat is the dark part of the Tilism, where very few people have access to and where are kept all the major secrets of the Tilism. And only the emperor and a few other people can access it. Now, by the time we get to Hoshruba, the original king of Hoshruba, or original emperor Lachin, has been ousted by one of his lieutenants, Afrasiab. And Afrasiab has been the emperor of the Tilism for the longest time, and he rules over the Tilism along with his wife, Harith, who is the queen. Now, one thing peculiar about Harith and Afrasiab is that they are almost immortals, and the reason is that they do not reside in the bodies that appear in the manifest part of the Tilism. They have different doppelgangers and copies running around, and if you kill a copy of them, you cannot kill Afrasiab or Harith. You have to actually destroy the actual living Afrasiab to do that, and that protects him from all different kinds of enemies. Now, Afrasiab also can read the future, right? His right hand tells him about the good tidings, his left hand tells him about the bad tidings. And he has access to the book of Samri, based in the mythological magician wizard from the Persian tradition, and he can consult what is to be in that book. So a powerful wizard, and he commands armies of sorcerers and sorceresses. And he knows that the conqueror of the Tilism is approaching, so his entire fight is either to delay the unbecoming of the Tilism or to somehow overwrite what has been previously dictated at the inscriptive moment of the Tilism itself. Now, all magical worlds pretty much in the Muslim Islamic traditions already have their unbecoming inscribed at the beginning of the start of a magical world. And it's called key in English, but it's not necessarily a key. It's actually a tablet, a takhti, upon which is inscribed the secret that, if revealed, the magical world would come crumbling down. So in so many ways, you can look at a Tilism or a magical world and realize that maybe its reason for existence is to protect the very thing that can destroy it. All those elaborate magical worlds are there to guard the secret of the magical world itself, which is kind of interesting. So that's the moment when Hamza's armies come towards the borderlands of Tilism Hoshruba, following this false god called Laqa, who has taken refuge with a local king, and that king is a sorcerer in the service of Afrasiab. So while Hamza is pursuing his fight against Laqa, and they're camping, one of the princes, Prince Asad, ventures closer to the Tilism Hoshruba and is captured. And when his horse returns empty, with an empty saddle, there is a hue and cry. People think he has been killed, and Amr the trickster, is sent to explore what has happened. And that launches the beginning of Tilism Hoshruba. Now, Amr, in his journey, encounters quite a few sorceresses and sorcerers, and finally reaches the border of the capital city of Tilism Hoshruba, which is called Shehr-e-Pursan, the city where no one asks any questions. Right? So you could be watching someone stealing something, but no one says anything about it. That is why it's called Shehr-e-Pursan. That is what makes it kind of magical. But the city is surrounded by a river which is called Darya-e-Khun-e-Rawan, the river of flowing blood, right? And on a bridge connects the world to the city, and at the beginning of that bridge are these three-layered towers. The first and the second story of the tower are these beautiful fairy maidens dancing and throwing pearls into the water, and the fish come up and take those pearls away. On the third level are these slaves who are fighting each other constantly in a sword fight, and it's their blood when it drops down into the river that gives the river its name, the river of flowing blood. And no mortal can cross the river without either express permission of the emperor or with the help of another sorcerer or sorceress. So the first thing for Amr and his colleagues to figure out is as to how to enter the city. And so that's where they enter the city. Now, in the very beginning, Amr also runs into this powerful sorceress who is angry at the emperor, and her name is Mahrukh Seher-Chishm. Mahrukh, the magic eyes. And she is the senior sorceress, powerful in her own right. And Amr builds an alliance with her, and she becomes part of the rebel camp, and that gives Prince Asad his army, right? And so it's very intelligently done in a way that there are already sorcerers who don't agree with Afrasiab, and they see the entry of Amr and the Prince Asad as this new power that they can align themselves with. And beyond that, Amr has 4 of his students with him. They are tricksters. Hayrat, the queen, also has 5 trickster girls. So while the heroes fight each other, the sorcerers and wizards fight each other, most of the story is also driven by the actions of the tricksters. How do they figure out to undo a new general that the emperor has sent to vanquish the rebel camp? So by and large, it becomes pretty repetitive because, you know, a powerful wizard comes and the tricksters figure out how to undo their magic, how to destroy them. But what I think makes the story really interesting, and which probably will not come across in the translation, is the poetry that's in the story. Part of the narration is in poetic form. There are a lot of erotic poems in it. And the formulaic aspect of the story, like how an army prepares, how a warrior prepares, it's repeated over time. But do keep in mind that it was repeated over time as the story was read in public, right? So that formulaic part might not have been too repetitive and too boring when you told the story, but when you read it, of course, it becomes highly repetitive. Another thing to keep in mind is that the worldview mentioned within the story is pretty dualistic. It's binaristic. There is a good side, there is an evil side, and the purpose of the good side is to destroy the evil side or convert them to the religion of the rebels. And that religion is also really interesting. It's not Islam, but it's proto-Islam. It's called Deen-e Ibrahimi, the religion of Abraham. And then the purpose is to convert the people to that so that eventually when Islam arises, they can convert to that. So that's how the authors negotiate the question of religion and faith. Now, towards the end of the story, after the rebel armies keep defeating Afrasiab, Afrasiab finally enters the Zulmat, the dark part of the Tilism, and unleashes 7 monsters that are at his disposal. Their job is to fight the last battles of the Tilism, and those are called Haftbala, the 7 monsters. And after those 7 sorcerers, powerful, elemental, titanic figures are defeated, is when the Tilism is defeated, and everyone converts to the religion of the conqueror, Asad. That's roughly the storyline. Now, I do have, favorite characters. Amr Ayar, greedy, petulant, petty as he is still probably the most interesting character. But as you read him in the original version, you also see he can be ruthless and he can be cruel. Now in Hamza Nama, Hamza was there juxtaposed against him being noble and being kind and generous. But somehow you see that in Tilism Hoshruba, that counterbalance is not there. Prince Asad somehow doesn't do the job, and the narrative is driven by Amr himself. Another thing that I found interesting was that even though there are powerful sorceresses in it, the story still is, a representation of its own time. It's driven by the actions of men, warriors who are basically ineffectual against the wizards and sorceresses. But women do have powerful roles in the story, including Hayrat, the queen, but Mahruh, the leader of the rebel camp, right? And other sorceresses. My favorite, of course, is Bahar. She, in my opinion, is the most powerful sorceress. And part of the reason is because her magic is irreversible, right? The kind of magic she does is she flies into the battle on a takht, right, on her throne, and then Bahar means spring, right? And then she throws a flower in the field against a marching army and then creates a whole garden out of that flower with birds and singing birds and flowers and colors. And anyone who enters that garden or sees it or smells the fragrance of flowers falls in love with Bahar. And once they do that, once they're entranced, then she can command them to do anything. So she's known for turning an entire army against the emperor. And her magic is irreversible, so all Emperor Afrasiab has to do is literally destroy the whole army because he cannot undo her spell. She's my favorite sorceress. Even when I read the epic in an abridged form as a child, she was my favorite sorceress. So this is the epic, Tilism Hoshruba. Okay. Now, I know that not all of you can read Urdu, and even if you know Urdu, maybe you can't read the classical 8 volumes. So if you can read Urdu, you can find the abridged versions, the versions written in contemporary Urdu. If you cannot read Urdu, I highly recommend that you should at least get the first volume translated by Musharraf Ali Farooqi and read it and see what you think about it. I hope this enables you to at least become a little bit curious about this, one of the most ambitious and probably the most complex in so many ways fantasy epics in Urdu, and probably the first of its kind in the world. But let me know what you think about it, and if you ever read it, share your thoughts about it, or if you have read it, tell me what you think about it. That's all I have to share today, and I hope this is useful to you. It's a slightly light-hearted topic. No theory here, just a story. So thank you so much. I hope you're staying safe, taking care of each other, and I hope to see you next time. Until then, as always, peace and love.